Enmity's Edge by The Land Raider convoy reached a halt, fresh snow falling from their hulls as they came to rest. Their forest green livery would ordinarily be a heartening sight to the Astra Militarum forces gathered before them, but the harsh brutality of war on the ice world of Rymnock meant that there was a little jubilation at their arrival. Motors stood idle as the assault ramp of the lead vehicle lowered, its interior light illuminating the late gloom, and out strode Lazarus and his fellow angels of death. The Imperial guardsmen were despondent, the whites of their eyes showing a regiment close to breaking point. They were taking what little cover they could find in bombed-out ruins, huddled around flame burners in a pitiful effort to escape the biting cold and indiscriminate psi bombardments. Colonel Bacchus, Rymnock 31st, Ice Warriors. The Astra Militarum officer gave a shaky salute. The prism stands. We've gone through 80% of our artillery stockpile and even had 2 marauder runs on it. Each time it's just swallowed our warheads whole. Ate 'em up, carried on flickering. We're just about out of ideas, sir, and these Emperor-damped psi bombardments have us at our wits' end. Lazarus turned his sights to the prism. Across the plateau, an immaterial prismatic spectrum stood in the center of the enemy's lines. The size of a warlord titan, endless strands of color flowed from pinnacle to base, its patterns both seamless and sickening, all at once. At its tip, a small but similarly colored sphere was rolling in suspension. Even as Lazarus evaluated it, its rotations grew faster and faster, the shimmering colors a haze of confusion to his mind. There was a commotion on the parapet as the Ice Warriors ran for cover. Eyes down! The sphere cast off, cannonading itself through the air at high velocity and making impact 50 meters from Lazarus's position. A kaleidoscopic detonation erupted, firing off retina-searing waves of warp energy in all directions. Those in the blast zone fell to the floor in agony, whilst those who did not avert their gaze, or have their vision shielded behind a helmet of power armor, were similarly afflicted. Guardsmen curled up on the ground, their heads swelling to bursting point as their senses were overloaded. Frenzied eyes became bulbous with stimulation, until a wet pop showered the ground with their contents. Viscous fluid leaked from eyes and noses, now empty eye sockets, an effluence of blood and brains that were accompanied by the harrowing screams of the dying. Commissars drew their bolt pistols, not for the first time that day, and walked the parapet, delivering the Emperor's peace. Librarian Ethereal's brow was heavy with concern. What is it, brother? Lazarus asked, turning to him. This is unlike anything I've ever witnessed before, the librarian responded. The prism must fall, but if it's impervious to arms fire. The librarian trailed off in thought. Lazarus gave him time. In his experience, the right strategy wasn't one to be found on impulse. Its appearance is too sudden to be the consequence of ritual or warp incursion, Ethereal continued. I would have sensed it earlier if so. It must have a more localized cause. An artifact, perhaps? Powerful psycho? Lazarus's mind worked over an assessment of detail and possibilities. As he processed his plan, the prism continued to flicker. Another sphere had manifested at the pinnacle, smaller than the last, but slowly growing with each rotation. If it's an artifact, can you contain it? he asked Ethereal. Yes, it is powerful. I might not be able to shut it down completely, but I can smother its effects as long as the rest of the Librarius lend a hand. Good, Lazarus replied, because if it's a psyker, I can kill it. Lazarus opened a channel-wide vox. All forces, this is Master Lazarus. Prepare to commence spearhead assault. I want every available gun covering our advance. An evil has rooted itself in Rhymnock, and we shall cut it out. At the tip of the spear, ardent advance, Lazarus's Land Raider Crusader carved a path across the frozen plateau. Snowdrifts and boulders smashed aside by its implacable offense. A staccato of projectile implants sounded across its hull as the small arms fire of the enemy bounced off its armor plating. Hundreds of rounds were shot back in return as the vehicle's hurricane bolters and assault cannons tore mutants, beastmen, and cultists asunder. To its rear, Predator squadrons, Devastator squads, and the battle tanks of the Rhymnock 19th Heavy Armor bombarded the enemy. Massed packs of demon engines spat back blasts of ectoplasma and let off salvos with their Hades autocannons that seared and rent the transports of the advancing Dark Angels. The survivors pulled themselves clear of the wreckage, only to be brought low by the hateful volley of the heretics. The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the Imperium, Lazarus thought to himself. 30 seconds out. His command squad drew their weapons, and Ethereal focused his mind for the psychic battle to come. They knew not the outcome of a close assault on the prism, but doubt was not their way. They would follow Lazarus into the great rift itself without a word uttered, and cast it back with bolt blade and indignation. 20 seconds. A large projectile scored a penetrating hit. The Hurricane Bolter's sponson was torn off, and one half of its magazine ignited. 4 warriors went down in the explosion. 10 seconds. Another hit jolted them forward, a las cannon blast that seared a hole through the drive bay. The driver was a bloody mess, but he clung to life to fulfill his duty. He hit the mechanism to deploy the Crusaders' assault ramp, and aimed straight for the prism. Disembark! Lazarus ran down the ramp and into the heart of madness. Stepping through the prismatic barrier, his charge was stalled by an ominous weight upon his psyche. His senses began to desert him. The stimuli was there, yet his mind could not process it. Every step was an exertion, every breath a labour of effort. He was aware, yet felt powerless to compel his body to react. Lazarus surveyed his surroundings. At the centre of the prism stood a sorcerer of the 1,000 suns, his arms raised and waves of colour flowing through his form. Ethereal had been right. I am a vessel of the Emperor's vengeance, spat Lazarus, forcing his way forward through the relentless waves of psychic force, but each step became harder than the last. The synapses in his brain were shutting down, his body refusing to respond to mental commands. All about him, those that had survived the armoured rush were similarly afflicted. Many had fallen, their forms deathly still on the icy floor. Brother Ethereal was on one knee, showing the strain of a mind waging war on a different plane. Lazarus raised his bolt pistol. I am his wrath made manifest. He unloaded his magazine at the enemy, the strain of the act pulling most of the shots wide. Any that found their mark bounced harmlessly off ceramite armor. What was once second nature was now an exercise in futility. The sorcerer glanced over at Lazarus, a contemptuous gaze and disdainful scoff his only reply, before his vision returned to the prism, and the ritual continued. Lazarus dropped to his knee, his life force breaking down under the psychic onslaught. He screamed at his mind and body to respond with one last kernel of resistance within him that would not give in. Mere meters away, Ithuriel was fatally succumbing to the greater psyche. Lazarus felt his brother reach into his mind and infuse his last vestiges of strength into him. The defiance that powered Lazarus was stoked, an ember of fury that would not be extinguished, and a blaze of righteous repugnance was set. As Ithuriel's duty came to an end, Lazarus was rejuvenated. "Through my deeds, his will be done," Lazarus vowed as he rode up onto his feet, lifting his sword above his head in an indomitable redoubt against the psychic torrent. All that he had left was summoned as he hurled the blade through the air. It flew, its energized edge alight with Lazarus's loathing, and it found its mark. Lazarus's sword cut through ceramite and buried itself in the hilt of his enemy's chest. The sorcerer fell to his knees in shock, the prism contracting as his arms fell to his sides. His head lolled onto his breastplate as hot blood fell to the frozen ground, and tendrils of steam curled upwards around his fallen form. The prism exploded, throwing polychromatic discharge across the battlefield that reflected off the white of the ice. Hundreds of warriors fell in agony. Lazarus was thrown back by the blast, and his world went black. Lazarus stirred himself from the memory. It was one he visited frequently, for he struggled to come to terms with the disaster at Rhymnock. Had his assault been a timely intervention, or had he been responsible for hundreds of avoidable deaths? This became a facet of his past that burned as hot as his Belisarian furnace. Both of those fires now defined him. One had saved him, the other had lit a seething hatred for the evils of sorcery. The wounds he sustained from the explosion had been so grievous that all hope was lost. Not even entombment within the sarcophagus of a dreadnought would have been enough to preserve his life. The Fifth Company apothecary, however, had other ideas. He had proposed that, in order to save Master Lazarus, the company master must cross the Rubicon Primaris. All knew that fording the Rubicon was a perilous task, one in which death was a common end. Considering Lazarus's wounds were dire beyond compare, his chances of survival were slim to none. Nonetheless, the apothecary would not be denied. He had argued Lazarus's stubborn determination would carry him across. Conducting the procedure himself, the apothecary had shepherded the company master across the Rubicon and into his new form. Once ignited, the Belisarian furnace had kept Lazarus alive for the lengthy treatments to his fallen body to be completed. He had emerged as a Primaris space marine. This was a significant step for the Dark Angels, for none could now say, "Colours doth not a Dark Angel make of all of their Primaris brethren." Though his body was new, he was still the Lazarus that had risen through the ranks with a steadfast spirit and an unwavering devotion to the chapter. He raised his head and looked around at the gathering. Trusted brothers, their forms hidden behind ceremonial robes, had taken position to complete this inner circle. Interspersed between them were stacked candles, their flickering light illuminating damaged stonework, bullet holes, scorch marks on the Gothic architecture of the sanctum. Marbus's Siege of the Rock was another bitter memory, one that all Dark Angels now carried with them. "Brothers," began Supreme Grandmaster Azrael, "disturbing portents have reached us from the sons of Titan. Visions of a winged monarch upon a devastated world reborn. The Crimson King and his legions of sorcerers are gathering. We know little of why, or what they aim to achieve, but the Grey Knights have requested our aid, and we will heed their call. Master Lazarus will lead the assault. Knightmaster Ineus and Huntmaster Estriel will support with the 1st and 2nd Company. You will be commencing this campaign with little established intelligence, so trust your instincts, and be wary of all else. Need I remind you of the last time we engaged heretics and sorcerers on this scale? With his orders delivered, Azrael stepped forward into the circle. I am indebted to you all for the trust you place in me. I can see that many here guard an unspoken objection, cryptic visions, and unidentified threats. Why would we commit our forces so blind and fight side by side with allies capable of uncovering our darkest secrets? To that I say this. Look around. See what has become of our great chapter. Many a brother is missing from this circle, cut down in Stygius, or lost to the great rift, their memory all that is left for us to venerate them by. The rock itself is gravely wounded, our sanctuary crumbling, and our sanctum sacked. We are slowly bleeding out, fighting a reactionary war against an ever-changing foe. The Grand Master turned to an archway. The burning candles at its base casting a lengthy shadow across the sanctum. He inspected the damaged stonework, seemingly weighing up his next words carefully. Our deepest sanctuaries have been breached. Our secrets have been pilfered. What we have guarded so closely for thousands of years is abroad, snatched from these very halls by the great enemy. The truths learned by those vile abominations are being woven into a tapestry of lies. Even the sons of Titan themselves could have gleaned truths from our dark history. Wide eyes stared at Azrael. They were all members of the inner circle, but such candid words from their Grand Master had struck a chord. Azrael turned to face them once again, passion coming to the fore. As our enemies and friends encircle us, we look upon fellow Dark Angels with distrust. Broken and bleeding, we reject those who have made oaths to our chapter, some of whom are true sons of Caliban. Even among this most trusted gathering, a master of our own stands as Primaris, his deeds enough to earn him a place within this circle, yet we still treat the Primaris with inherent suspicion. Eyes danced over Lazarus this time. He knew of the hushed conversations in the alcoves of the rock, of the mistrust that even members of this gathering held for their new brothers. He was now an undeniable example of the fallacy of that notion. No longer shall we be on the defensive, allowing our enemies to maneuver around us. No longer shall we be idle on the hunt, oblivious to what secrets run free. We shall strike out, hunt with scent or no, and remind our enemies why we are the first. Kindle the fire that burns within you. Nurture it into a searing fury, and bring down retribution upon Magnus and his sorceress legions for the destitution they have brought upon our chapter. Lazarus was returning to Stygius, the very theatre that now defined him. He gripped the hilt of his sword. They had recovered it with him, its crackling edge pure and free from the warp taint that had affected all else that day. He had renamed the blade Enmity's Edge, and with it, the Dark Angels would have their vengeance.